for second day of the housing webinar. Right, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today's session. Right, Dr. Carmelo Ferlito is the CEO of the Center for Market Education, CME, and a Senior Fellow at Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He's also a research advisor for Kobalindo Nusa Property in Jakarta, Indonesia, and a Senior Fellow at the Property Rights Alliance in Washington, D.C. Dr. Ferlito earned a Master in Economics and a PhD in Economic History from the University of Verona in Italy. Dr. Ferlito is an author of 5 books and more than 30 scientific papers. He has also applied his theoretical analysis to policy studies, in particular to the Malaysian and Indonesian property markets and housing policies, and to the issues of tax reform, financial literacy, cost of living, and agricultural policies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to now hand over the platform to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito for his presentation on Housing Forward, Transitioning from Housing Crisis to Housing Stability. Dr. Carmelo, you may begin.
Thank you very much, Pearl, and thanks to REHDA for the nice invitation. I'm happy that I'm often a guest of REHDA. This annual event is an honor to be invited by such a prestigious institution. I would also like to thank Ideas for having asked me a few years ago to start digging into the Malaysian property market, and to Kobalindo Nusa in Indonesia for having given me the possibility to extend this research also to Indonesia. So I will share my screen to share with the attendees my presentation. Okay. So today we will discuss not only where the real estate industry is heading in Malaysia, but also I would like to spend a few words on the impact that is coming from the emergency that we are experiencing because of COVID-19 and the policies that were implemented to try to curb the spread of the virus. Later I will share the presentation with REHDA Institute, and there you can find all my contacts and website where you can find my publications or my public speaking activity. I will unfold the presentation in 5 points. First, describing the special context that we are experiencing in 2020. Then I will touch my perspective about what does it mean housing crisis in Malaysia, and then how we should move and what it means that we are moving toward housing stability, both from the perspective of the housing market in general and from the perspective of affordability issue. And finally, I will do some conclusions. So what does it mean that we are living in a very special context here? I think this is obvious for everybody. It has been a very peculiar year for the world economy, and most probably this situation will continue in 2021 because of the great shock generated by domestic and international movement restrictions, and also for a certain rhetoric of fear that has been developed by certain media and by the world communication. At the same time, we have experienced unprecedented threats to human liberties, and I think that those nations that will be less willingly to trade freedom for at least promised safety will be the most resilient ones. So we all know that confidence is important for business. So all those nations that will not give up to their freedom and will maintain confidence will be the ones that will restart faster and stronger after this emergency. Now, here I put some estimation on the GDP from IMF and from ADB, Asian Development Bank. I think we are all familiar with the forecast for the Malaysia GDP, which is expected to drop down around 5 to 6% by this year, and there are quite optimistic expectation of growth around 7% for next year, 6-7%. We have heard this also during the budget 2021 discussion. I believe, as probably you know from the newspaper, that these expectations are probably not realistic given the present scenario, unless the scenario change radically. But either these statistics are true or not, what I invite all the economic analysts and the economic actors to think is that we don't simply need to spend money in this moment. Spending money is not enough. We need to drive the country on a path for sustainable growth. So it means a growth that doesn't generate more harm in the future and that doesn't penalize future generations. So it is important to see how the growth is generated and take a look at the micro foundations behind the GDP growth. But looking at a more realistic scenario, I think that where we are heading now, unless the situations radically change, is a reverse square root recovery. So we experience, we know a slight rebound in Q3, but most probably the way ahead is more or less flat, unless certain fundamentals change. So the risk ahead is a flat growth after the post-lockdown rebound. And what do we need to do in order to minimize this flatness, to have a more sloped growth? First of all, we need to avoid extended and generalized lockdowns, like the one that we are experiencing in the whole Klang Valley today. And this is all the more true at the light of most recent researches, like one that was published a few days ago in Denmark, according to which there is no correlation between lockdown and spread of the virus. The lockdown is eventually useful only to avoid stress on the hospitals, but there is no evidence that lockdowns really can stop the virus. So, having said that, if there is no stress on the hospital, there is no point to stop the economy without getting any medical advantage. Second point, we need to become confident and work hard on a potential cure for COVID-19, which is not necessarily a vaccine. Two in a hurry vaccines are not safe for the people. We probably should focus more on other type of cures. And we dramatically need an ASEAN coordination on international borders. We can't think to have the economy back on track if at least business travels are not allowed. This is very important and will definitely boost business sentiment. Remember that the economy will not grow if we don't improve the business sentiment. Now let's go into probably the topic that you are more interested in after this macroeconomic introduction. And I gave a special title. I believe that we have to consider the real estate scenario in Malaysia according to two different types of crises. First of all, there is a typical real estate crisis, but later I will explain the meaning of this word, which is the end of the cyclical dynamic that began after the 2008 cycle. So it's something that can be defined and housed in juggler. A juggler is an economic cycle of the duration of 8 to 12 years, so a medium-length economic cycle, as was defined by the great Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter. Then we have the second type of crisis, which I summarize with the expression the affordability conundrum. And here we will discuss in a while what does it mean and how we should measure affordability, the trade-off between home ownership and household debt, and the issue of social mobility. People that are familiar with my presentations probably know already what I'm going to discuss in a while. Third point on which I want to call your attention is that we can consider the COVID-19 crisis as a catalyzer of tendencies that were already in motion. More or less what World War II was for the 1929 crisis. And in particular, it is accelerating the tensions between future and present-oriented attitudes, on which I will discuss very shortly. So first of all, what I call the housing juggler. So the latest real estate cycle initiated after the 2000-2008 financial crisis, and it reached its peak in 2012-2014. Since then, the cycle has started its downturn, which I call crisis. I know is a word that analysts, in particular in property market, do not like, but I use this word from an economics perspective. So in economics, the word crisis is not necessarily something huge like what happened in Europe around 12 years ago. It is simply that process of normalization and stabilization after a hot economic period, and that can be defined as a downturn of the cyclical dynamic. So we don't have to associate the word crisis with the word crash necessarily. Crisis is a readjustment process, a normalization process that comes after a moment of euphoria that cannot be prolonged indefinitely. And such a dynamics is very much observable in the price trend. Prices, we know, are cooling down, are going toward stabilization. And if you ask me why prices are not collapsing, first of all, I would say because of the peculiar nature of the property market in Malaysia, and this is something that we can't really dig in today. But I would also add another very important factor, the fact that interest rates are unbelievably low in this moment in Malaysia at a very historical record low, and artificially kept interest rates that are kept artificially low create inflationary tendencies. So you have a deflationary tendency in this moment that will push prices down, which is somehow counterbalanced by inflationary tendencies created by the low interest rates. These create a situation in which housing prices are more or less stable or growing in nominal terms very moderately. We can see here the Malaysia House Price Index over the past 10 years. So it's a constant decline after the peak that I described, that I just mentioned in 2012-2014. If we look at these figures for the past 25 years, I think is even more significant. You can see that the juggler that we are discussing now, the one that started after the 2008 crisis, was very much more moderate compared with the juggler of the post-2000, the post-1998 financial crisis. But we are now in the path for moderation. Here you can see the same trends, the same numbers, not in absolute terms, but in terms of variation, of quarterly variation on an annual basis, that express the same issue, the fact that the prices are cooling down, both on a yearly basis and on a quarterly basis. Now, what I mentioned before is that the lockdowns accelerated certain trends that were already in place in the property market. And this can be observed by looking at both the volume and the value of transactions in the first half of 2019. So we had a 30% drop, more or less both in value and in volume. There has been a rebound after April, of course, when the economy was allowed to reopen, and I think this rebound is also due to the fact that housing is somehow a safe investment, is looked at as a safe investment. So those people that have financial resources will keep on investing in the housing market, not despite the crisis, but precisely because of the crisis. Now we have to see how much this recovery tendency is a short-term issue or a more stable long-term issue. I think that we will observe a more flat growth in the next quarters. Now let's move to the second type of crisis, which is very vibrant in Malaysia, the so-called affordability conundrum. So there is an interesting trend in the policy debate. I think that you all have noticed that we discuss less about affordability. The government seems to have stepped back from affordable projects. Something has changed. And I'm happy about this, if you are familiar with my previous talk. I'm happy that the government is stepping back. I think it's a good signal. And recently also the government told that probably they will focus only on rental projects. This is good. Probably this is also the sign that the government recognized the failure of the affordability houses policy that has been followed so far. And I argue that we should focus on the affordability debate from a totally different perspective, on the way in which we measure it, on the trade-off between home ownership and household debt, and shifting the focus from poverty per se to social mobility. So I believe that measuring affordability from only the PIR perspective is a not good way to do so. It's too easy and doesn't take into account factors like location, size, connectivity. And the CME, and actually in cooperation with Provalindo Nusa in Indonesia, is working on developing a new affordability index. Second, remember that whenever we talk about policy, we should focus on trade-offs. You cannot implement a policy without negative consequences produced somewhere. Home ownership in Malaysia is 77%, but household debt is around 85% of the GDP, and probably it will grow considering the difficult moment and considering the fact that half of the debt is made of home loans. So I think that we will see a growth in this index. So, and also the overhang statistics tells us that even affordable homes are less in demand. And from a policy perspective, we should focus probably on household debt rather than home ownership in this moment. Because from a policy perspective, you cannot act on both without producing negative consequences in one of the two. Here, just a quick look at the latest overhang statistics. You can see that around 10,000 out of 16,000 high-rise overhang, and around 6,000 out of 9,000 overhang in interest are below 500,000 ringgit. So the majority of the overhang is even in what we call affordable homes. So it means that there is less demand for houses, in particular in what is called affordable. So the political discussion on affordability is completely misplaced. And I think we should rethink affordable housing strategy from a new perspective. So not looking at home ownership, but looking at social mobility. So the problem is not that people are without a house or that they are poor, but to have an institutional framework that allow them to grow their conditions, their income, and to reach the point to buy a house if they want. And under this perspective, location and connectivity is key. And I think that we need to rethink new public and private partnership under this perspective, as I will discuss later. So moving from crisis to stability, what does it mean, stability for the future in the housing market? The housing market in Malaysia is becoming more mature, and you have to be very aware that the more the country progresses on the way to become a developed nation, the more the fundamental of the housing market will evolve. So the high land or real estate returns of the past are indeed in the past. Forget about it. You're not going to buy a house for 500,000 ringgit and resell it at 5 or 10 times that price in the next 5 years. So the more and more for many buy a home will remain the life investment. And it doesn't make any sense to think that fresh graduates should be able to buy a house. This is not happening in a developed country. And let's ask the fresh grads to pay back for their PTPN loan first, rather than thinking about getting more debts for housing and cars. Our generation is in fact struggling between future and present oriented tendencies. They have a pressure from one side to buy a house as soon as possible, but they want also to be free to move around, to accept job opportunities elsewhere. So while the present young generation will struggle among these two tendencies, only history will tell us which tendency, so mobility or stability, will prevail in the future. What to do instead with affordability? Obviously, we have to think at the role of government no more as a home supplier, but simply as one agency that coordinates different duties. As I mentioned, connectivity will be the key word in order to push people from being poor to be better off in the future, and therefore to buy a house as an option, not as a dogma. In this sense, we need to create more private-public partnership in which the developers change partially their role and start to think also about developing transportation systems and handle them and manage and develop houses as part of a wider strategy that is no more simply house development but becomes urban development. So not simply getting the advantage from the government building public transport and therefore revaluating an area, but be part of that revaluation since the very beginning. That means taking responsibility also in transport development. Here, the last proposal for affordability is that the government and developers should think about projects together in which certain units are reserved for the needy and are subsidized in terms of rent, not in terms of purchase, by the government. And the subsidies are removed as soon as the people become better off, because these buildings should give access to better job opportunities and therefore improve social mobility. I have to move fast toward my conclusions. So COVID is not changing the world, but it is accelerating processes that were already in motion. The Malaysian real estate sector is moving toward full maturity, and there will be a long period of price stability and a more dynamic interaction between supply and demand. And under this perspective, I invite the analysts to focus on the importance on the micro tendencies. We will have a certain part of the market going up because, as I mentioned, people with financial means will still invest and buy the property as a safe investment. But we will have also part of the market cooling down because people are losing jobs and become more financially insolvent. It will be a challenge for the developers to understand and to go more into the micro tendencies, but they are in the market and they can understand all these things very well. And finally, until the next cycle, the property market, the property world, will be a world of more stable returns. Two key points on affordability to conclude: shifting from poverty to social mobility, and shifting from home development to urban development through different strategies in terms of a greater role for private developers in delivering affordable homes, but also in delivering public transport solutions. That's all for my presentation, that I will make available to REHDA Institute after this, so the ones that are interested can ask to the organizer and can receive the PDF of this presentation. Thank you very much. I think that now is time for a Q&A session.
Right, thank you so much, Dr. Carmelo, for the very interesting presentation on affordability. We will now move on with the Q&A session. We have one question here from Tam Kai Ling. Economic backbone is the drive force behind the property transactions. In your opinion, which economic sector will be more or most likely to lead the next recovery?
Well, it's a very difficult question, I think. First of all, on the relationship between property market and general economic recovery, I think that there is a double-sided relations. Nobel Prize economist Vernon Smith has found that in the United States, between 1929 and 2008, there has been 12 minor crises, and all of them have been anticipated by housing market crisis. So somehow the housing market is an anticipator of more general tendencies, and later on also obviously becomes influenced by the general economic trend. But we have to consider the two situations as very closely related. On the future, I think that we should not focus on a specific industry alone. This is very difficult to predict, and I don't think that there will be an industry that will actually lead the economic recovery. We need, in this moment, a different strategy for a more sound recovery, because the whole economy was affected, and in particular the backbone of the Malaysian economy, which is made of small and medium enterprises. I think we all read the news that since March, 32,000 small medium enterprises closed down, and we should focus on rebalancing this. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for the answer. Okay, we have another question here. In your opinion, what is the best method or variable to measure affordability?
Yeah, okay, this is, I will not give an index because I'm actually working. This is a research project on which I'm working at this moment. It's not easy because when we go into measuring, we always have to leave something out. So we have to be sure that we don't sacrifice too much in terms of abstraction, and we still keep a close look at reality. I think that now what we use always is the PIR that takes into account only the average income and the average price. The new factors that need to put in are size, so not the average price, but the average price per square meter, so how many square meter you can buy with a certain income. And the other is access to job opportunities, which means connectivity, that means location. Because in certain areas, PIR is low, that means houses are affordable, but because they are very bad area, nobody wants to stay there. There are no transportations, or there is a high criminality. Think about the Bronx in the 80s. Who want to stay in the Bronx? So obviously houses are affordable there, but for very peculiar reasons. So I think that connectivity and something measures social mobility, social opportunities, need to be put into a new index. That makes the new index much more complicated to find.
All right, sure, thank you. I think that's all for now. I'm not sure if there are any questions. I think, yeah, that's about it. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Carmelo, for your time and for sharing your experiences.
Thank you very much to you.
We hope to have you back again in our future events. All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.